Tamir Novotny. I'm the Executive Director of Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, and I am really glad to have the opportunity to present this joint briefing of the Change Philanthropy partners on behalf of our coalition. We are really excited to have you all on the line today. As many of you know, this was a sold-out event. There are ultimately going to be somewhere between 80 and 100 of you on this line, and it just speaks to the appetite that folks have to learn more about what's happening in this crazy time that we're living in, and how it's affecting the many different communities in our networks. For those of you who have joined from, outside of EPIP's membership, thank you for being here. Welcome. And just to tell you a little bit about who we are, we're a network of change agents working to advance excellence and equity in philanthropy. And our members are typically anywhere from 22 to 50, relatively new to philanthropy, either new to the working world or new to philanthropy from having spent 10 or 20 years in the nonprofit sector. And we create space for folks who to connect with one another, find a safe space, process what they're dealing with, learn and practice new skills, and chart a leadership path forward for themselves in or out of the sector. EPIP is deeply proud of being a partner of Change Philanthropy, one of now 10 Change partner organizations, and I'm grateful to all the Change partners for taking the time to do this briefing with us. From EPIP's sort of parochial perspective, part of the reason we wanted to organize this was that since the election, we've been talking with a lot of our members, and they've had a lot of questions about how to make sense of this moment that we're in. But a few of them that kept coming up, and it is true for all of us, was what's really happening in the communities now? How is philanthropy responding, and how should it be responding? And then what can we, as practitioners who deeply care about equity, many of whom identify the communities that are being threatened directly, and have different levels of power and influence, what can we do in our day jobs and outside of our day jobs to feel like we're really doing our part to protect the communities we care most about, resist bad policy where it needs to be resisted, and build power. And so we're really excited to be able to have this space together. And this webinar is, of course, one of many taking place in philanthropy on this topic, but we're glad to be able to do it in a way that really brings different communities together with an intersectional lens. And with that, I just want to pause and see if Carly Hare, who's here with us, Carly is the Coalition Catalyst for Change Philanthropy, if you want to say anything up front about Change or about this session.
Hi everyone. Noa tatasa Carly Hare, tatasa rakita hudachadix. I'm Carly Hare, and I serve as the Coalition Catalyst for Change Philanthropy, as Tamir said, and we are excited to be part of this webinar and to bring our partners together to share what we're seeing at the intersections and of our communities and where there are ongoing needs and opportunities. For those of you who don't know, Change Philanthropy is a coalition of philanthropic networks working together to strengthen bridges across funders and communities. And we are transforming philanthropy from within by building knowledge, fostering diversity, and creating connections. We do this towards a vision of transforming and challenging philanthropic culture to advance equity, benefiting all communities and igniting positive social change. And you heard from Tamir as one of the core partners from EPIP. Additionally, today on the phone, you'll hear from 5 other of our core and collaborating partners. But our partner circle includes APFI, a Partnership for Black Communities, APIP, Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, Funders for LGBTQ Issues, Hispanics in Philanthropy, Native Americans in Philanthropy, and Women's Funding Network, in addition to our collaborating partners, the National Center for Responsive Philanthropy, the Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity, and Neighborhood Funders Group. We're excited to bring this conversation today and to share what we're hearing from the communities that we are connected to and how our funding networks are responding. With that, I'll turn it back to Tamir.
Thank you, Carly. So before getting into the heart of the discussion, I'm just going to walk through a few technical pieces. So one, if you have technical difficulties, comments, or questions for the Q&A part of the session, on the right-hand side toolbar, there is a box for questions. If you type those in, we will see them. We're going to hold the questions until the end because we want to make sure with a lot of speakers on this agenda that everybody has a chance to respond to their questions before we get into group conversation. If we aren't able to get to all of your questions now, we will try to follow up with responses after the webinar. You may also have seen that this webinar is being recorded. So if you have a comment or a question that you want to remain anonymous, please put a couple of stars or just write anonymous before your question. And we won't read out your name when we read out your question. We won't be doing polls here, so don't worry about anything there. I think we should actually use a different hashtag for this. You're seeing coalition collaboration in real time. So if you're going to be tweeting this webinar, of course, we ask that you, especially for participant questions, don't name folks if they're telling a story that's rather sensitive. We trust your judgment. But we're going to, on the spot, suggest the hashtag change briefing for points that you want to make sure you're sharing with your networks. We'll be sending out a post-webinar survey. It's great if you can complete that. That allows us to just know how we're doing and develop better content that meets our needs and the needs of our members. A couple of quick things that are going on that we just want to make sure you know about. One is a survey that we're doing called the Sector Experience Survey, and some of you have seen emails about this already. Basically, if you've been to a meeting after the meeting, or you've been in a hallway at a conference and people are talking about stuff that they're struggling with in philanthropy, it can often be hard to prove those when we're advocating for practices that better support folks' success. So we're asking folks to anonymously share their thoughts on their experience at work, their feelings about their future in the field, and their thoughts on the sector overall through this anonymous survey. We'll also send that out after the webinar. We're very close to 200 responses, and we want to make sure that the response pool is as diverse as possible so that we can fully reflect the experiences of folks in this field. So with that, we're going to start getting into the conversation. So I'm going to start with Catherine Mancera from HIP, Hispanics in Philanthropy. And Catherine, one of the most visible moves this administration has made is to ramp up immigration enforcement and deportations. You all released in the last, I believe it was the last year, a new strategic framework focused on supporting Latinx leadership, equity, and voice. How are the activities of this administration affecting how you see that framework play out in practice?
Hi, everyone. I wanted to put my video up so I'm not just a disembodied head talking at you. Really good question. I mean, as you all know, this new administration is going to have a huge impact on Latino communities, and making sure that Latinos have a seat at the table, that their voice is heard, not just in philanthropy, but in terms of the public policy debates, et cetera, is hugely important to HIP and a fundamental part of our mission. In terms of our response, we've tried to react pretty quickly to what's going on, and we've been talking to a lot of our funding partners and to our nonprofit partners who we help fund about sort of the most effective ways to do this, balancing being, you know, proactive and not being too reactionary at the same time. So we've done a couple of things that we're pretty excited about. One of those is that we are currently launching a rapid response fund in North Carolina for nonprofits that work on immigrant issues. So if you all know anyone on this call, a nonprofit that works on immigrant issues in Latino communities in North Carolina, please feel free to refer them to our website. We're calling for proposals right now. We also are launching a couple initiatives that I'm really excited about on our crowdfunding platform, HipGive. For those of you who aren't familiar, HipGive is a crowdfunding platform where we invite Latino nonprofits to raise money for their projects throughout the Americas. So right now we have a big Go Mujeres campaign where nonprofits are raising money for issues like protecting trans Latinas in San Francisco, to supporting victims of domestic violence in Guatemala, to helping Latino women get legal aid for immigration issues, you know, a range of really amazing nonprofits that are raising money. So we're trying to be really proactive in terms of organizing different crowdfunding campaigns, and we're going to be organizing another big one coming up in May to coordinate with May 1st, which is the national immigrant strike, as many of you probably know. And so we're going to be running a whole campaign throughout May to support nonprofits throughout the U.S. that work on immigrant issues. So, you know, these are just a couple of the things that we're doing right now, but I think, as you all know, this is a very challenging time, also a huge opportunity in terms of how fired up people are, how much they care and want to get involved. So we're seeing it as sort of a double-edged sword of challenge and opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to Ben Francisco Malbec, the President of Funders for LGBTQ Issues. Ben, at the time that we wrote the prep notes for this this webinar, there had been already 7 reported murders of trans women of color. I think that number may have actually increased since the time that we wrote these notes. We're witnessing a rollback in legal protections for LGBTQ people around the country, and of course many people who identify as LGBTQ also carry many other identities that make them vulnerable in general and especially now. You all have been very active in response to recent events. Where are you at, and you know, what are you seeing and hearing? What does it mean for how you're thinking about your work?
Thanks, Tamir. It's so great to be on this call with so many partners that we love working with. So I'm going to start by just sharing sort of some quick highlights of some of the challenges, particularly facing LGBT communities now. And to your point, you know, we are particularly worried about trans communities and how they're being affected by some of the new executive actions and potential legislation. So one is, for those who don't know, just what was it, a week or two ago, Trump issued a new guidance on Title IX. For context, the Obama administration had issued a guidance saying that Title IX, which assures equal protection regardless of gender, that also applies to gender identity and therefore protects trans students, that trans students need to be adequately protected and treated by their gender identity by all school systems. So the Trump administration recently issued a guidance reversing that and saying that this is the state's issue and that states should have the freedom to decide basically whether or not to discriminate against their transgender students. The good news, so obviously that's bad news and sends a horrible signal to trans students and a horrible signal about sort of whether the federal government will protect their rights. The one sort of silver lining is that the administration is not the final word. This has also been working its way through the courts, and consistently the courts have already sort of confirmed the Obama administration's position and guidance, which is that the Title IX protections do apply to gender identity. There are a couple cases working, recently that there was one of those cases, the GG case, that was going to be heard by the Supreme Court. They sort of kicked it back to a lower court because of the new guidance. But many of us in the LGBT funding world and advocacy world, feel good that ultimately the courts will do the right thing and affirm that regardless of what the administration says, the federal law protects transgender students. That relates to another issue, which is under the Obama administration, we made a lot of progress, somewhat quietly, making lots of administrative changes that protect and validate trans people, such as, for example, making it easier to change your name and gender on passports and other federal identity documents and various bureaucratic systems. And we are worried, so far those have mostly stayed in place, but we're worried that those are another area where we could see a rollback in protections. Some other areas, obviously, the horrible orders on immigration affect at least 270,000 undocumented LGBT people. Similarly, the Affordable Care Act proposals that we've seen. The Affordable Care Act it really is an LGBT civil rights law, among other things, in the degree to which it assured full access for LGBT people and helped millions of LGBT people get health insurance. We're also worried about defunding of Planned Parenthood, both because of all the excellent services they provide, but in particular in many areas, especially in some rural areas, Planned Parenthood is the primary, if not the only, provider of services for transgender health care. A decrease in funding for Planned Parenthood would have a huge effect on LGBT communities. The last thing I'll mention in terms of specific challenges we're seeing on the LGBT front is there have been rumors that the administration is considering religious exemptions executive order, which would say that all federal agencies and contractors, if they have the ability to discriminate based on being LGBT, being a single woman, someone who's a single mother, any number of other identities. Basically, the federal agencies and contractors can discriminate if the agency or the individual has the religious belief that they don't want to serve that person. If that did happen, that would be a devastating executive order and would really open the floodgates for various service providers, including adoption agencies, foster care systems, any number of other providers to discriminate against huge swaths of the population. That has not happened yet, and there are rumors that there is sort of internal disagreement about whether to go ahead with that order, but the fact that it's on the table even is very disturbing. And there are also the same forces who are pushing for that executive order, which is to say the far right, are also pushing for a federal religious exemptions law, which would apply even more widely. And we're also watching similar legislation continue to work through various state legislatures, which are also, generally dominated, unfortunately, by extremely conservative members. Again, the good news is many of these laws are likely unconstitutional, and they are being and will be challenged. But it is a significant battle that we need to be vigilant of. So that's all sort of depressing news. To share some more positive news, our members are responding in wonderful ways. Just a few examples. Several of our members have been working on rapid response funds, both locally and nationally, to provide dollars to LGBT grassroots groups as they respond, both to terrible national executive actions, but also things percolating at the local and state level. A number of our funders, our members, are supporting litigation, which is really crucial to preventing some of the worst actions and legislations that are being proposed. And we're also, I've really been pleased to see that increasingly our members are thinking intersectionally and, funding across, thinking about how to fund at the intersection of LGBT and immigrant rights, for example. In terms of our work, we've been doing our best to share resources in real time with our members, and we'll keep doing that. One major opportunity for that coming up is Funding Forward, which is our annual conference of all funders committed to LGBT issues. It will be in Seattle at the end of the month. We invite all of you to join us. Essentially, the theme of the conference this year will be how do we advance LGBT rights and social justice in such a challenging climate where so much repression is happening. We're opening with a plenary of leaders working across a range of movements and strategies, working on reproductive justice, LGBT rights, immigrant rights, racial justice. We really want to encourage that kind of cross-pollination. And then we're closing with another plenary, really looking deeply about how do we work together across strategies. I think too often in the LGBT movement and all movements for change, there's a tendency to become wed to one particular strategy. So, particularly, we're doing the grassroots mobilizing. That's the only way for change. Others are doing the litigation or more of the inside game to try to change policies and laws. And we really believe all of these things are necessary. So we want to facilitate a very authentic conversation about how both movement leaders and funders can coordinate across different strategies, acknowledging that we won't always have exactly the same tactics, but there are nonetheless ways we can sort of support each other and make sure we're working in synergy, even when the specific tactics might be slightly different. And that's all. Hope to see many of you at Funding Forward.
Thank you so much, Ben. Now let's go to Marcus Walton, the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at APFI, a philanthropic partnership for Black communities. Marcus, APFI, as you of course know, for those on the line, APFI has already been organized to support Black-led social change and the infrastructure behind it. For example, the Black-led Social Change Funders Network, which you've organized in partnership with the Hill Snowden Foundation. Meanwhile, the administration's new Justice Department is taking a very different tack on Black-led organizing, perhaps, than the prior administration. To what extent and how does that affect your framework regarding this network and other APFI priorities?
Thank you. Let me make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
Marcus, can you turn up your volume a little bit? You're a little bit faint.
Got it. Thank you. So yeah, that's an important question that you're asking. We appreciate being able to follow Ben and funders, because a lot of what I've witnessed, a lot of what we see is connected to the conversation around civic engagement, civil liberties, and how they're being framed. As you mentioned, APFI's been really active around racial equity, and the conversation for racial equity happening within the philanthropic sector has only increased in demand over the past 1.5 to 2 years. APFI's been at the forefront of promoting and advancing this strategy for over 5 years now. So one of the ways that this has come to develop into an initiative is through the Black Social Change Funders Network, as you mentioned. A couple of activities are underway, but this initiative in particular focuses on a couple of things that I like to define as challenges that we're starting to see under the current administration. I think the best example of what I offer is a comment, I think about a month and a half ago, and we could choose from several, I'm sure, but this was Vice President Pence mentioning that, or actually questioning the legitimacy of structural equity within our criminal justice system. Right? You can find this online. You can find it in some of the articles that are floating around the cyberspace. But the point here is that for 5 years, we've been laying the groundwork, focusing on structural equity, having conversations with colleagues in the field, grant makers and others, allies and grantees alike, about the importance of closing racial disparities between various groups. Our focus, of course, is Black communities. Now, the question of whether structural racism exists is something that we have to take serious, understanding that we've heard several things that we probably wouldn't have imagined would be considered as having any legitimacy. But now we want to be intentional and consistent in our efforts to continue to deepen our capacity and expand our message to some of the more marginalized communities that would need this the most. For APFI, this looks like the Deep South in particular. We're partners with grant makers for Southern Progress and several other colleagues to have more consistent, more intentional conversations of racial equity and what that can look like, what that might look like across intersectional conversations and institutions that include the Deep South in their focus areas. Specifically, there's a couple of activities taking place on the calendar that I'd like to mention, but then I'd like to close out with one more point about how APFI is responding to the current conditions and what we've seen from our colleagues. In March, towards the end of the month, we'll be on the Hill, Capitol Hill. And this is a direct response to what we're noticing from the current administration. We partner with the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. On March 23rd, we'll be doing a breakfast during Philanthropy Week. It'll be connected with the Congressional Black Caucus and other funders who support Black communities. Uh, in April, we'll be continuing our fellowship. Many of you are aware of the Connecting Leaders Fellowship Program. We'll be launching our 12th cohort. This is within the next month or so. Toward the end of April, perhaps you'll start to see applications. We encourage you to keep an eye out for that. The specific thing about the fellowship is that this is our most intimate initiative for training and developing leaders in AFI's framework for racial equity, what we call responsive philanthropy in Black communities. And that program takes place over 10 months and is connected on the front end and back end by annual conferences and unity summits, depending on the year of the particular cohort. So we encourage that because it also becomes an opportunity for intersectionality that we don't always consider. It's not only for Black foundation executives, but it is intended and very intentional about supporting the retention of those officers who are particularly focused on advocacy for Black communities. So we welcome allies in that effort. Lastly, over the next couple of months, and as a regular part of the work that we have traditionally led, we're organizing Black businesses, CEOs, as well as Black trustees. And in both of these conversations, we are responding to specific issues around minority investment, around some of the economic factors that drive disparities, and using our framework in very intentional ways to develop strategies collaboratively around closing some of those gaps. So lastly, I'd just like to invite everyone to actually take a look at the case statement that we put together as a part of the Black Social Change Funders Network. The website is blacksocialchange.org. And as I mentioned, ongoing efforts will really be focused on what are those, identifying those populations, like such as the Deep South, that might be most susceptible to unanticipated consequences from some of the rollbacks and backlash that we're witnessing across multiple populations that we serve.
Thank you, Marcus. We're going to hear from Hong Nguyen from Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy. Hong, some of the administration's most controversial activities, particularly efforts to ban people from predominantly Muslim countries, which unfortunately have reached a new level of implementation in the last few days, as well as ramped up immigration enforcement, have directly affected people who fall in APEP's primary demographics. You all have been engaging with your members more broadly about your strategic plan while all this has been happening. Tell us more about the process that you're in, where your thinking is.
Thank you, Tamir. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, if you could turn your volume up just a little bit.
Perfect.
I think now you're totally muted. Did we lose you?
How about now?
Perfect.
Great. So following the elections, we really wanted to make sure that our response provided our members with a concrete way to act. And we saw Giving Tuesday, which happened to take place 3 weeks after the elections, as an opportunity. Through our Giving Circle network, we developed a rich database of organizations supporting vulnerable communities around the country. Our call to action at that point was to encourage our members to invest in organizations that supported communities such as the MEPSA community, as well as the Dreamers, 2 of which we had programming in the past. So they're communities that we follow closely. We felt it was important to continue to strengthen the work that was already happening on the ground. more recently, we launched a member engagement survey in our 10 regional chapters that included questions about what our members are seeing as the biggest threat or challenge to the local AAPI communities under this new administration. We wanted to make sure that we were listening to our local communities rather than assume we knew exactly what was happening. We also wanted to know what opportunities our members anticipate moving forward to organize and support the local communities. The survey is an important first step for us in understanding what and how our members are engaging at the local level. We hope that the survey will provide insight on where there are overlap and gaps as we begin to organize our work in a way that is more meaningful and responsive to what is currently taking place nationally. I think ongoing, we're going to be having deeper discussions with our chapters, starting with our annual meeting in Los Angeles in May, to really start then organizing around what's happening. So we definitely want to share out some of this information moving forward. So we definitely look for opportunities to provide this information as a follow-up.
Thank you. So we've now heard from 4, possibly 5 of our Change Philanthropy Coalition partners who worked with specific populations or groups of populations. Now we're going to hear from 2 of our partners, Janae Richmond from the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, and again from Carly Hare on behalf of the remainder of our partners, on what they're seeing across communities and movements at the national level. And Janae, I'm going to start with you. NCRP, of course, is one of the nation's leading organizations in terms of pushing philanthropy to deepen its support for equity and social justice. How would you assess where philanthropy is right now in terms of its response to what this administration has been doing? And how are you looking at continuing to move the needle in this more turbulent climate?
All right, thank you, Tamir, and hello, everybody. So as many of you know, NCRP recently released a new 10-year strategic plan. It was something that, took several months to put together, and saying that it was not specifically developed for this moment in time. However, it is still extremely relevant. So 4 of the main takeaways from that strategic plan are movement. So we've identified 12 different movement areas that we are going to be pushing for change in. To name a few, we have like arts and justice, health equity, women's equity, Black lives, criminal justice reform, immigration, so on and so forth. And so we'll be, pushing on the funder side and also organizing nonprofits to really just raise their voice to speak to philanthropy. So I wouldn't be the manager of our membership program if I didn't make a pitch right now. So if any of you all know of any groups that are doing fantastic social justice work who should be a part of this movement to push for change in philanthropy, please let me know. My email is jrichmond@ncrp.org. Another area we're moving into is high network donors, and so just acknowledging that there are other ways that folks give, and that we should be influential in how people go about that giving. We're going to be producing shorter reports, and so those reports will be more digestible and user-friendly, and just better tools for you guys as you are working within your institutions to produce an internal change. And then last but not least, we have engagement. And so I actually saw a great quote last night about change on Pinterest, and I can't remember exactly what it says right now, but pretty much, we want to make sure you guys are engaged with us so that we can produce the change that we want to see in the sector. And so that's going to be really important for folks to just be bold and be willing to take risks and to share all of the great things that you're learning through resources like this webinar. So get in touch with us, and if you want to partner, just let us know. I think that the comfort and the laxness that we felt with the Obama administration is gone, and so the time's just really call for us to, get serious about working together drop the formalities and the traditional way of doing things and come together like a family to really work through this. And then to kind of speak to the other part of your question about how philanthropy is doing in this time, you know, I know many of us heard a few weeks ago about, you know, how much money the ACLU raised. You know, in speaking with them, we know a huge part of that uptick was due to individual donors and not an increase in foundation giving. And so I think this really mirrors what some of my colleagues have reported hearing out in the field, where funders have said, you know, we need to wait and see, let's not overreact. You know, it hasn't been long enough. And so, you know, when I think of one of our recent reports, Pennies for Progress, we learned that, you know, foundations did well before, during, and after the recession, while the rest of America was in deep trouble. I think specifically, foundation assets grew 70%. Support for underserved communities grew 15%, and then support for social justice strategies didn't change at all. And so, you know, just thinking of that, our nonprofit members recently spoke about what they would like to see from philanthropy during this time. To quickly summarize, it's what you guys have probably heard before, which is to be bold, to speak up, to support multi-year general operating support. And so, you know, unfortunately, it seems like philanthropy is still kind of slow to respond to that call. And, you know, on the surface, we may see conference themes and press releases and things that make us feel like we're heading in the right direction. You know, I like to personally live in a world where it's more than obvious that these things are actually happening, the things that we know will allow us to see the impact that we're looking for in the organizations doing this important work and in the lives of the populations that they're working to, you know, better. And so, you know, that's what we're working towards. You know, I'm looking forward to working with the other change partners in this and also with working with you all as well. So we'll certainly need everyone as allies in these efforts, and hope to support you guys in all of your endeavors as well.
Thank you, Janae. Now we're going to go back to Carly. Let's see, her headshot is here again. Excellent. We're going to go back to Carly, and Carly's going to talk to us a little bit about what some of the change partners who aren't on the agenda with us today have been up to, and some of the things that Change is doing in order to support a collaborative response in a time when organizing in philanthropy is critical. Carly?
Thank you, Tamir, and thanks all the partners for sharing their information. What I think is, during these challenging times, what we're finding is the inspiration of so many folks coming together, the practice of solidarity being manifested in a lot of the work we're seeing across the board on these issues. And we're beginning to see those being mirrored by a number of the core and collaborating partners of Change Philanthropy, as well as other partners in the field, and how we can look at these issues in a deeper and intersectional perspective, how we need to stand up aside and be side by side and supporting other communities when issues arise. And as funders, how do we pull back the silos that our institutional giving processes make, and what changes can we begin to see within that? As Tamir said, I'm going to highlight some of the projects in which our other change partners have been working on prior to even the election results, the election and the results and this new administration. One of the largest movement moments in the country and for Native communities was happening at Standing Rock. And that has continued to build and grow and shift and manifest itself. And our partner, Native Americans of Philanthropy, has stepped in to take a role not only in advising and encouraging funders to take part in that place, but really on the organizing side as well. So NAP has joined as one of the collective members and founding members of the Indigenous Women Rise this week, which is why they can't be with us on the call today. They are in DC for the Native Nations TP Camp, a week-long action that's happening addressing issues of community, environment, women's health, safety, and really bringing the Native context and community to call its power and address issues that are happening and policy that's going to affect and impact our communities in that way. And Native Americans in philanthropy has been leading conversations in that space. Additionally, we know yesterday, being International Women's Day, a large call to effort around gender equity and addressing gender issues in our communities, and our Partner Women's Funding Network is leading deeper dialogues and conversations within their network around that work and are stepping forward in a variety of ways. This year they will be convening in September and really looking at issues of the intersection of women and money, health, community, giving, and really looking to think about how collectively you can strategize and mobilize and change the game for women and girls' outcomes. And they continue to work on a variety of strategies to move that forward. Our other collaborating partner, the Philanthropic Initiative for Racial Equity, is wrapping up phase 1 of a racial equity for economic security project, which is focused in the South, and they're looking at finalizing findings and recommendations for funders to strengthen funding investments and economic inclusion for funders as we're moving forward in their work and really organizing on the ground activists and funder relationships within that space and doing advising. And then our final partner, Neighborhood Funders Group, through a variety of their working groups and programs, including Funders for Justice, Grantmakers for Southern Progress, and then their general membership outreach, have been doing a number of program efforts that include a series of webinars. Last week they held From Sanctuary to Freedom, Cities and Resistance, conference call for funders to really how can funders align with sanctuary cities and what are the opportunities there, and that will be soon be available for debrief and download. Next, at the end of the month, they're holding a conversation with a keynote of Senator Elizabeth Warren on organizing for Wall Street accountability and financial reform, a funders briefing and discussion. So really, how can we look at broader issues for community that our communities are facing, and how can we support that in really thinking from a policy perspective. Additionally, nearly all the partners have joined joint statements and have been collaborating in collaborative conversations with their field partners. We signed on as Change Philanthropy to the Joint Foundation Statement on Immigration that was coordinated and developed by grant makers concerned about immigrants and refugees and continue to support and engage them in their work. We also know a number of regional associations are taking deeper steps into informing their networks and their communities around what they're doing. And we're seeing philanthropy organize itself. So whether that's the social justice infrastructure funders collaborating and connecting to see where they can strengthen their own resources between each other. And finally, one of the ways in which we hope to help provide a space for community and bring folks together during this year is our upcoming 2017 Unity Summit, which will be September 19th through 21st. All 10 collaborating partners, core and collaborating partners, are joining us in this effort to hold a intersectional conversation around investing in movements for equity. What is the funder response? How can we engage, and how can we really support equity at this moment in time when inequity seems to be on the rise and part of the political agenda? And we'll continue to pursue efforts in how to address that, and you'll see those coming through this next year as we prepare for the Unity Summit, along with a call to philanthropy to really engage deeper, and there'll be more information about that this summer. And with that, I'll turn it back to Tamir.
Thank you so much. So that concludes the individual response portion of the session. Now we're going to go to participant questions. We've had quite a few coming in. There are two ways you can ask questions. The easiest is, again, on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little box that says questions. You can actually pop that out with a little box with the arrow going to the left. and type a question in there. You can also ask a question via Twitter through the hashtag Change Briefing, and we'll bring those out as they come. I'm just going to kick us off with one in sort of corollary to the talk of many foundations taking a sort of wait-and-see approach. Those of us who are impatient could imagine, we're talking about things that we've been doing for a long time, and even as we're working to be responsive, each of our organizations is also trying to stay true to who we are and, not default on core obligations we feel we have to our constituents. How do you guys, as organizers in this space, think about that, and how do you address folks who might, even with everything that we're doing, say that we should be doing more? And that question is open to any of our panelists who wants to jump in. If anybody's answering, you're in mute. So I'll jump in at once.
This has been, I think we're probably all pausing because I think it's a really hard question. There's, having been in philanthropy a long time, there sort of is always so much of, if you are a champion of social justice and philanthropy, a lot of the work is about that sort of, slow moving of the needle, the series of conversations that lead to more conversations until you finally see a payoff. I think I share the questioner's frustration and sense of urgency that that's really just not enough right now. And so I apologize that I feel this answer is completely inadequate, but I'll just sort of share my own thinking process. What I have been thinking about is what are the strategies that we can shift to perhaps push a bit more pointedly, a bit more assertively. And I do think that's something I'm seeing, even with the degree to which both we as philanthropic networks and foundations have made public statements standing against the most egregious and repressive actions of this administration, I do think is a positive sign. I think there may be other strategies too, but that's just a very short opening shot. If anyone else wants to chime in, I'd love to hear how you're thinking about this very tough question.
Yeah, this is Marcus. Oh, go ahead.
So I would just add that we're also seeing a number of funders begin to have bolder conversations about how they can loosen their resources and make their funding more accessible. Some of that's come through the creation of rapid response funding projects. Some of that's come through escalating collaborative and pooled funding programming to get money into community. And then we're also seeing a number of foundations taking steps to just loosen the confines of the current funding that's on the ground. So whether that's shifting program or project-specific dollars to general operating, and we are definitely hoping to see more funders participate and engage that way, not as we aren't able to say securely what's coming down the pipeline and what the communities will be addressing.
Yeah, and this is Marcus. I'd be remiss if I didn't offer a slightly different perspective, and let's just consider it as a complementary one. Never being one to settle for an either-or approach, this kind of dichotomy that sometimes puts us in a mindset of competition. And being a former organizer, I think it's really important for us to be clear that there's the institutional approach and then there's the personal approach, but both can be happening simultaneously. And my experience and really some of the principles around our work, around this Black Social Change Funding Network and other movement work, is that change, real change, institutional change, sustainable change, requires a commitment on a personal level as well as a professional level. So to just sit back and expect any particular institutional organization to advance change on our behalves is insufficient for the type of change that we all aspire in terms of our shared vision. So I just encourage anyone who is already invested in a professional capacity for advancing this type of change to also consider the spaces that might exist personally and to suspend any urge or inclination to separate the two. This isn't the time to compartmentalize our focus as much as it is to bring our whole selves into everything that we do. And that includes professional and personal engagement around these issues that we all care about.
Thank you all. Marcus, Ben, Janae, Hong, and really everybody on this line, all of you work with different cross sections of folks who are quote unquote sort of an EPIP demographic, meaning that they may be junior or mid-level staff, maybe they're considered up-and-coming leaders. And many of our members feel a deep sense of personal pressure to find a way to advocate or help move their foundation internally in support of some of the things that we're talking about. What guidance do you have for them in this moment to be a part of bending the arc of philanthropy toward deeper support for equity and social justice? Maybe to get us rolling, I might start with Janae.
Yeah.
Sorry if I cut somebody off.
I was on mute. I'm sorry. Tamir, could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So the short version is, what guidance do you have for folks who are maybe a little bit earlier in their careers or in junior and mid-level positions who are trying to move their institutions in support of some of the things that you all have been talking about?
You know, I feel like that is a tough position to be in when you know, are frustrated with philanthropy and how it's going, and you don't really have much input on the final say. You know, as other folks have already mentioned, philanthropy is very slow-paced, which is something that I have learned after, you know, switching over to working with folks in this sector. You know, my advice would be to, first of all, practice self-care because this is just going to be a frustrating process, and you want to make sure that you are there because folks in the communities are going to need you in that position for the long run. But also to, you know, use the allies and support that you have. So you're already a part of EPIP, which is great. You know, in CRP, we're definitely offering ourselves and anything that we can help you all with to, you know, even maybe talk you through a tough conversation that you need to have with someone within your institution. We provide different tools, you know, which can serve as talking points. So we have, you know, a report that talks about the return on investment for doing social justice funding. So perhaps you want to have that difficult conversation with someone, and you can use that to say, here's some research that was done that can, you know, back up why I want to get into this. So really just, you know, take care of yourself and to rely on the other folks who want to support you through this.
And Tamir, I would, this is Carly again, I would add on, it is about building relationship and networks and within philanthropy, whether it's any of our core or collaborative partners under Change Philanthropy, whether it's your regional association, it's finding your people in the field and then doing your own deep dive in education, thinking about what are the areas in which you need to build your context to have a better understanding about how you can be a better partner and ally into the work is a way to think about it. And Change and our partners later this year will launch a project/campaign that will help folks think through, no matter what role you're in, where can you begin to advance, leverage change within your institutions, build intersectional opportunities, and really think through systems change towards evolving philanthropic culture to be one that honors and engages and celebrates equity in practice, not only in talking points. So.
Thank you, Carl. And I want to add something that Susan Batt, the CEO of AbbVie, said at our conference this year, where we had a panel that was focused on this question of how folks in sort of EPIP age, if you will, can help move this agenda forward. One of the things that she said was really powerful was that a lot of times change in organizations actually comes from the middle when folks who have less power speak up, and sometimes that comes at personal risk, but through some combination of more agitating and more sort of shedding light and moving in an allied way, folks are able to get people's attention. And that's something that at EPIP we're going to be continuing to focus on and sort of helping folks think through how they develop their personal, internal, and external advocacy strategies. So we are starting to try to take one last question from the audience here. There were a couple of questions about outcomes. And on this one, I'm going to start maybe with you, Catherine. If we were to think, or actually, Carly, maybe I'll start with you. In this, as we think about what we're all trying to do individually and collectively, are there common outcomes that you see across our communities that should be sort of the direction in which we point our votes?
So I would say definitely looking examining and engaging in deeper dialogues across communities, regardless of the issue as an outcome, that we can begin to track, monitor, and support in philanthropy. How is solidarity work moving the larger work forward, and how are we supporting that? That's something we can definitely reflect on as a field, and definitely is underinvested in and could be invested in more. I believe looking at ways in which funders are creating more responsive grant-making process at this moment in time, and also how they're managing their current grantee and investment relationship. So the shift from programmatic dollars to general operating, the engagement of leaders in deeper dialogue around the direction of grant-making or portfolio investment. For those that don't actively engage in participatory grant-making, are there ways in which you can pull in the resource, the knowledge, and really listen to the organizers, activists, and leaders within the communities that you're funding, and use that wisdom and knowledge to help reflect the current decisions you're making in a more strategic way, given the needs and concerns they're hearing. I think those are all practices in which we could begin to integrate and that we could share movement towards, and we can track. Have funders actually shifted any of those resources to be responsive, to be more engaged, to include more community at this moment in time? And those are all fit within best practices for social justice grant making, for aligning your funding and supporting constituency-led solution-based organizations and diverse leadership in that space. And I would say there's a number in which we could look at collectively and identify a priority of which we can do as a field. But I also think there's also individual pieces that individual professional philanthropists and philanthroactivists can do in their day-to-day roles, and we can begin to track and engage folks on those as well.
Thanks, Carly. This is Catherine at HIP. That was a great response. And I just wanted to add to, we're working on a report about why it's so important to think intersectionally about these issues. I was just reading it today, and so that really came up for me. I mean, so many of these issues are not just going to affect, Latinos. They're not just going to affect Black people. They're not just going to affect women. And some of these issues, it's just really important that we take an intersectional approach so that we're considering, race, class, and gender in our funding strategies. President Obama did really awesome work on this. I think there's a lot of, work on this, especially around Black and brown boys and men. I think it's something, though, that the U.S. funding community especially still needs to do a lot of work on, especially in incorporating gender into the fund making strategies. So, I think that's a really big opportunity for all of us to be thinking about and sort of pushing. It's something the international community has really taken up, and it's a big space that we need to be thinking more proactively about going forward.
Thank you, Carly and Catherine. And I'm sorry to say that we've hit the hour. I feel like we could easily spend another hour or two talking in greater depth about this. But I want to thank everybody for joining, and a few closing notes. One, we still have all of the questions that folks have asked, so we're going to circulate those to our speakers, and we'll ask folks if they can to add a few notes, and then we can, post that, send it on an email and post it on our blog afterwards. So thanks for those who had a lot of questions that we couldn't get to. Second, we're going to have more webinars coming up about these issues. A couple that we have in the hopper. One is about the structure of anti-equity movements and how they have been countered in other contexts. We're also in conversations around webinar just on the basic mechanics of policymaking, as Ben mentioned. These days, I think checks and balances has never felt more important to a lot of us. And so we're just gonna, help folks who feel like they want a deeper understanding of what that looks like, get it, and where the different frontiers are, to Ben's points about where change can still happen or negative change can be thwarted. Additionally, there will be other change partners potentially leading webinars in the coming months on behalf of the coalition, as we've done today. We've been proud to be the test subjects. And again, I just want to say a huge thank you to our partners at Change Philanthropy and the nearly 100 of you who joined us today for this conversation. If you'd like to share the recording with your colleagues, we'll be sending it out, posting it on our website as soon as it's ready. So just thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.